did many people know that there's a very vibrant and active science fiction community actually active in the Netherlands. So the Amsterdam Culture Group wanted to introduce you to some of the very much live and very much writing, very interesting authors. There's 3 authors today instead of 4. You were promised 4, but unfortunately one had to cancel due to circumstances. But still, we are very, very happy today to be joined by, first, Mike Janssen. He's sitting over there. Give him a round of applause. After that, we'll have Anna Haan. She's sitting over there. Give her a round of applause. Yes, thank you very much. And then at the back there's Floris Kleine. Give her a round of applause too. So what we're going to do first is we're going to read from their work. So we're going to hear what they actually write about and what their work is all about. So it's going to be very interesting. After each reader, there's time for some short questions about the work, like how did you come up with this brilliant idea and stuff like that, and that's the idea. And then afterwards we'll have a panel discussion with the 3 of them, and we'll talk about Dutch sci-fi, how it goes, how it's working, what the Dutch scene actually is looking like, and how it works to also actually start publishing in English, because many of these authors publish in English. So we'll have a short panel discussion also, and I think somewhere about 5:30 we'll be finished, and then we can have even more beer. But you're already drinking beer, that's good. So, without further ado, I'd like to have a warm welcome for the first author. And let me just check the card, because I think you were an editor at the Verschijnsel anthologies.
Correct.
That's one thing. So Verschijnsel, for those of you who don't know, is one of the biggest publishers for Dutch science fiction. And I think you've edited for 2-3 times, or how much did you edit it?
About 30 books.
30 books, that's a lot. And you also won the first prize at Fantastels, which is a competition for fantasy. Yep. So, and well, actually, it's interesting, all these authors, they've been publishing already for 20-30 years. So they're already very much established authors. 2012, 2013, you won the Baarn Cultureel Festival, I think also.
Right.
Yeah, and in 1991 even, you won the prize for Best New Author. Yeah, exactly, that's the one. Right, so give him a round of applause. Mike Janssen, well done already.
Thanks. Okay, so I'm Mike Janssen. This is about science fiction, so I'll be reading a number of science fiction stories. I do have, however, fantasy and horror available should people feel like that. If it gets very warm, I'll read some horror with some sugars. That would be nice. So, when I write, I usually do a little warm-up exercise. And a warm-up exercise for me is a very small micro-story. So, that could be 70 or 80 words. And those 70, 80 or maybe 100 words should be a story. And it's either science fiction, it's horror, whatever. It's just to get the juices flowing. So I'll start with a number of those, and they're really small, and sometimes they pack a punch, and sometimes I try to make people think. So I'll start reading. The first one is called Room with a View. The suit protects me. It's the strongest thing ever devised by man. After the accident, Jupiter caught me. I am beyond rescue. As I sink through layers of atmosphere, carbon snow accompanies me down. The suit struggles, but the tug is inexorable. The core welcomes me on a bed of diamond substrate, and an everlasting epitaxy layers carbon on my body and compresses so that I see sky through diamond until the light dims. So this is an example of a micro story. It's actually, it should be less than 420 characters, which is a Facebook update. Because there are some contests out there which give you the room of a Facebook update, and this one was written for one of those. So. Let's see. The second one is called Sailing. The sails unfurled majestically across 15,000 square miles, millions of monostrands converging on the tug of our capsule. Solar wind propelled us slowly, increasing G's towards our destination light years away. Terraforming robots prepared for our arrival in 60 years. 6 months out, a transitional flow from a dead nova tripled our speed. We would get there fast, but have no planet to sustain us. Which is very annoying, of course. Okay, this is horror. Okay, this one is a bit closer to home. Monoplane. You know what a monoplane is? Double-deckers and monoplanes. Monoplanes. The game calls forth 2 monoplanes, faster than our regular biplanes. but also trickier. My ghostly plane scores its first hit on the enemy's fuselage, and in the real world I see my opponent frown. She's good. She's really good. She spins and rolls and loops until she fires rounds through my tail. My hands are jolted as my plane explodes. She smiles, and I smile back. Best of 900? She asks. A slaughter coin. Okay. Let's see. What have we here? Okay. This one's called, this is the last very short one that I'll do. It's called heliography. Heliography is the study of the sun. Something's brewing out there, I'm sure of it, said the researcher. He looked again at the graphs of the solar cycles of the Milky Way of the past 5,000 years. No one would listen, and the researcher finally gave up and retreated to a nice place on the beach where he could watch the stars. That night a few stopped shining. All following nights, more of them just vanished. Okay, now for a little longer story. Which one are we going to take? Sometimes I write stuff that's a crossover between fantasy, horror, science fiction, and whatever. Not sure if I should read one of those. But, do some real science fiction here. Okay, this is actually, it's a travel story. It's visiting a wonderful place. The story is called Am-Nur. The first glimpse of the ruins of Am-Nur always brought sighs of wonderment. Noah observed the tourists with hardly concealed contempt. He carefully chose the time of day to reach the maximum effect of the first rays of the blue sun, as they hit the deep black monoliths that arose like twisted, rotten teeth, several hundred yards from the white salt rock of the plateau. After a journey of more than 5 hours from the spaceport next to Clarkstown, the 3 men and 2 women had been well tenderized by the irregular pace of their Nurgle beasts on the rough terrain and the icy fog that always hung around the plateau. The purpose of Am-Nur is, like the place itself, still shrouded in fog, Noah said as he dismounted near the entrance of the structure. The columns are irregularly shaped, but quite obviously artificial. It is not known if the forefathers of the local population were involved in its creation. We do not know if they ever reached the required level of intelligence or technology to even envision the architectural brilliance that the builders obviously had. Noah walked beneath an arch of grey granite that seemed to float on countless red crystal wires that grew from the black walls. The tourists trudged along after him. They soon forgot the pain of their journey in the mesmerizing display of light and color and the warm, inviting glow that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. The passages beneath Am-Nur have never been fully mapped. Even with our advanced technology, building a similar construction might take a human lifetime, or more. The origin of the lights is unknown, although there are some unconfirmed speculations. Noah described the arches and tunnels and bridges and gates that together formed the bizarre maze of Am-Nur, and the tourists listened carefully, each with their personal Arpex sensor array at the ready. A long stairway, 1,202 night-black steps veined with red crystal, leads us down to the central chambers, many hundreds of yards beneath our feet. This stairway, a dark hall, appeared before the group and fascinated the tourists peeked down over the edge. The view was spectacular, as if a dark pupil was surrounded by a spiral of glowing red veins, and the tourists again sighed with appreciation and wonderment. The descent took more than half an hour, and Noah carefully counted the steps. The central hall was no less impressive than the rest of Am-Nur, and the tourists never noticed the guide's slight hesitation as he stepped down from the stairway. The group of people stood still, overwhelmed by the grandeur of their surroundings, the subtly changing lights over vistas of green and red and ochre and blue. "Can you tell us about the curse?" asked the eldest of the 3 men, a well-to-do 50-something who had introduced himself as Bryce Marsden. Noah smiled mysteriously. "There are rumors of disappearances, ones that undoubtedly you have been told, in Clarkstown." Bryce Marsden nodded and grinned. "Were you told about the passages that move? The feeling that some people have of being watched? The new arches and bridges that sometimes appear out of nowhere? The refusal of all pack animals to even come close to this place? except those vile carrion-eating beasts that we had to ride on all the way here. No need to try scaring us, Bryce Marston said. We have faced tougher challenges. His fellow travelers nodded their agreement. Noah looked at each of the tourists, serious and slightly sinister. Then he laughed joyfully. Amnur is a strange place that does strange things to people. It's mysterious, impressive, and above all, very beautiful. I dare admit, I've grown very fond of the place in the past years. He waved the tourists further into the tunnels that spread out from the central hall. Of course, I have developed my own theories in the 2000 years that I have been a guide here. I think that Amnur was never built by anyone. It came into existence like a living being that grows and develops, but so different that we cannot understand how it lives or if it acts with purpose. The tourists listened to his words breathlessly, while subtle blinking lights all around them gave the impression of a moving star-filled sky. Noah released the 5 Nurgle beasts below the fog level of the plateau. Untrustworthy and vile creatures they were, that were known to bite their rights or to suddenly bolt, mostly in awkward or even dangerous places. No one would think twice of a bunch of tourists that went out on such beasts, got lost, and died. On his way back to Clarkstown, he looked back often, with longing and desire. So, time for another one?
Yes.
Okay. It's called Babel-SF Bridge Builders. Many times have I seen the red suns of Babel rise. The many mountain ranges make this a fascinating chiaroscuro. The mountains alternate with deep gorges and valleys that are covered in shadows most of the day. Only when the suns are high in the sky are the deep jewels of green and purple vegetation revealed, along with the remains of the dwellings of the builders who have long since left. Every sunrise brought me higher mountains and new bridges. At first primitive, moldy things made of organic materials and held together with rope and some sort of dark red pitch. I've often stared into deep crevices as another plank crumbled beneath my feet. The gravity is low, but a fall of many hundreds of yards is not something I desire anywhere. As I continued over the mountains following the 3 sons of Babel, I noticed the progression as described in Beek's Wonderbook on lost civilizations. The bridges became massive structures carved from the local rock and more often inscribed or stained, depending on your taste, with scenes and weird glyphs. And always there was the next mountain to climb, the next bridge to build, regardless of the weather, rain or wind, which can howl through the gorges with hurricane force, as I can testify. Regardless of the new challenges that confronted the builders time and again. So the bridges became elegant structures with many strengthening arches, built from stone and cement, and in places the road showed neat pavement. Progress was obvious in all aspects of the bridges, and in the valleys below there were geometric patterns of roads and buildings. Plants had overgrown much, but enough remained visible. The heavily rusted steel girders of the following bridges formed the next stage for the bridge builders. The new technology they employed allowed them to span wider gorges and to unlock wider valleys that would profit from the sun's longer and bring glorious prosperity. One of the bridges of this era had been named in Beek's Wonderbook. It was called the Heaven Span. It was the peak of ingenuity in bridge building, and the arched construction spanned many miles of low-lying land, with just occasional supporting towers to allow the next arch to rise up. But this bridge too ends. The final mountain range meets the ocean that spans the rest of the planet, and this is where the bridge builders created their final masterpiece. Next to the remains of slender towers and many roads that range from north to south, along the steep rock face is the last bridge on a small island before the coast. It is the culmination of the bridge builder's art, the result of millennia of innovation and improvement and downright brilliance. A wide road rises with a slight gradient to a few hundred feet and disappears into the eternal fog that hangs at a crossing of warm and cold ocean currents. Beek's Wonderbook explains that the bridge extends up to 20 miles into the ocean without additional support, and there abruptly ends. That in itself has rarely, maybe not ever even, been matched on any of the Emerald Worlds. Standing at the end of the world, I feel sadness, compassion for the race that so long ago conquered every obstacle until they met this final, greatest challenge of all. They tried that which had served them well, but applying all their knowledge and experience of many millennia, and they failed. At the highest point of the mountain range, I have clear view of the expanse of the last ridge, a straight line that fades and disappears in the softly roiling sea fog. The ocean air is fresh, and the view is magnificent. The horizon, I realize, is some 20 miles away from this height, and I wonder, did they really fail, or do we not see their final achievement?
Beautiful.
More?
Yes.
Good. Keep an eye on the time.
That's my job. You're doing fantastic.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. This story is called Cochrane, New Ontario. The Methodists in the small town of Cochrane on New Ontario have traditions that go back centuries. Separated from the rest of the world by their luscious gold and purple prairies, many miles without roads, rugged terrain, and finally a barrier of terrifying meccas that guarded the borders of Cochrane territory, this community grew its food and tended to its cattle, all in utter peace and quiet. Not the old earth cattle stock, but the local version that allowed itself to be domesticated almost as well. They were called bacalai, and the Cochraners were remarkably protective of their domestication secrets. In my job as Omega controller for the province of Nevgodahuai, from an old earth language which roughly translates to "Hooray, we landed, never again," I landed my personal air travel vehicle, or PAV, just south of Cochrane. The town is idyllically situated by the river Splash, a busy, gurgling stream that, through a series of minute waterfalls, arrived at the Clearwater Lake, which I could see just to my right from the window of my PAV. The water lived up to its name and sparkled in the yellowish light of Tregatu. Low houses were built along the gentle slope of the hill, all the way to the top, where a giant Mobius oak spread its twisting branches over Market Square. I tapped my head to the sheriff, who sat in front of the courthouse in the lazy afternoon light, in the manner Dick's Wonder Book, the standard for faraway places, describes. I like Dick's Wonder Book. It's fun. The sheriff nodded. "Stranger?" He could have said it to the air. "My name is Frank Lester. I am Omega controller for this province." "Sheriff Lundqvist," said the man in the chair, still not showing any interest. "I am here to investigate the death of Cheryl Simonet last week on the east side of Cochrane." Sheriff Lundqvist looked up. The look in his clear blue eyes was blunt, superficial. "She walked the forbidden zone. The Meccas don't know the difference between intruders and good folk." "Yes, well, they can be programmed very thoroughly in that respect, actually. What I am here for are the final words of Cheryl." The sheriff sat straight, suddenly interested. "She was alive?" "Barely. Enough to tell things to her rescuers." The sheriff held his head at an angle, as if listening to something. Then he growled, "Figments of a sick mind, controller. You already know what I have to say. Let me tell you that Cheryl had been hallucinating of late." His story was plausible. Cheryl Simonet's story indeed bordered on the insane. Frank walked through the town, stared at by the locals, pale faces underneath white-brimmed hats and dark, archaic clothes. The view of his first bacalai bull was frightening. Not so much for the dangerous-looking horns of the creature that crowned its head and that extended across its back. Also not for the claws with needle-like nails, but mostly for the piercing, knowing look in the big green eyes of the animal. He stared at the bull curiously until it retreated into the grass that was as tall as a man. "I understand you will be staying the night," the sheriff spoke behind Frank, while the latter stared at the remains of his PAV. Something had torn the craft to pieces and spread all the parts across the field. "What caused this?" Frank asked. "Localized tornado. Happens all the time here. Let me take you to the saloon. They have rooms available. We rarely get visitors, but I assure you, you are most welcome, so I've been given to understand." The sheriff walked ahead of him up the hill toward Market Square. The night lit up, and Frank Lester sat up straight in bed. The next moment his mind was flooded with images of the surroundings of Cochrane. The fields filled with grass, gold and purple, but with a rich sheen that he had not seen before. The Mobius oak looked like a friendly green radiating wellspring of happiness. The penetrating noise of the waterfalls turned bright and clear and wholesome, almost hypnotic. Slowly, Frank felt his mind drift away on a sea of blissful oblivion. 1 week later, Frank Lester sent a report to HQ, through the radio, together with his resignation. Chaussonnet, he concluded, was obviously a disturbed person, and nothing out of the ordinary was going on in Cochrane. Satisfied, he left the radio post, and his bacalai led him away.
So I'm curious to hear some responses from the audience. Do we have some questions about the stories?
No questions.
No? Go ahead, sir.
Mike, can you describe where your ideas come from? Is there an author that you kinds of readings you do? Or?
I have several authors that I really enjoy, and those would be Glenn Cook. Probably you don't know about him, but he writes epic dark fantasy, and I like that kind of stuff, so that's pretty interesting. Ian Banks is very important for me.
Was very important.
Yeah, it was very important. Well, he still is very important. I mean, his work lives on. Werner Vinch is very important. Yeah, there's so many good authors out there. I read a lot. So,
And then you add something. Where does that come from? Can you describe that?
I have no clue. Really,
Right.
I don't.
Okay.
It's just I have an extrapolating mind. So it means that whenever I read something, my mind starts wandering. And when I wander to specific parts, then it becomes interesting. And it becomes interesting. I'm like, well, I could write a story about that. So, yeah. Everything I read gets incorporated into some kind of, yeah, I don't know, a gestalt. Something that holds themes and ideas and questions, many questions. So, what you see happening often in the stories that I write is that there are many themes in there, but there are also questions that I try to answer. And I have no clue what the questions here were, because it's too long ago. But I have a number of recent stories that I know the questions of. I know what the questions were. And because of those questions, I started to write a story, to resolve those questions, to answer myself what the heck was going on. So, it's a bit of a convoluted answer, I think.
Oh, good answer. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Yeah, it's interesting. I noted in your earlier pieces that you seem to mix old ideas and new ideas.
Correct.
It was very obvious in that last piece. I had views of John Wayne as the sheriff and all the rest of it. Do you do that deliberately? Mix that then type of idea?
Yeah.
Yeah.
For the simple reason that
Okay.
it's a reference. So we all have references in our minds. We all have ideas on how the world works. And there's kind of a consensus on how it works, apparently. So you know about John Wayne, you know about, I remember the Fantastels contest, where my story was identified as having been written on the music of Ennio Morricone.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
And the jury was correct. That was exactly what happened. So it's a frame of reference, and that frame of reference is something that you can use. It's a gimmick, of course. You use it as a frame of reference to introduce new elements and new themes. And the end result is that you get something that's, on one hand, very familiar. On the other hand, it tries to pull your mind a different way. So that's how I write my stories. More questions?
I was wondering, how do you pick the names of the characters or the places? For example, what struck?
To make sure that people, when they read the stories, they'll think again, or maybe even 3 or 4 or 5 times. It's a way of layering your story. It adds to the story.
So, does it answer your question? Is that
Yes, somewhat.
somewhat?
Yeah, but do you look for meaning in
Yes,
it?
sometimes. For instance, in Dutch we have an old play. It's called Mariken van Nijmegen, and there is a character in there who is the devil, who is called Monen, M-O-O-N-E-N, as in demonen, as in demons. not quite. Okay, I'll admit, not
Floor
quite.
will explain it.
It explains it a bit easier. Anyway, the Monen character is something that you may find in my work. There's someone called Monen there. How many people know that this is the devil? And is it the devil? Or am I just toying with you? That happens sometimes too. So, yeah. So there's often meaning in names, yeah. Names of people, names of places. Just wrote a story for an English anthology, which is about trains. It's a train anthology. And in that story I have a number of places, a number of locations that have specific names. And the editor asked me, this sounds so familiar. What have you done? Why is this so familiar to me? I'm like, well, you know about the American Midwest. And you know about the type of names that are being used in the American Midwest. But you also know that there are Indian names in there, like Milwaukee. It's an Indian name. But you also find British names, like, in this case, Kensington, which is a very British name. And the funny thing is that if you walk around in the American Midwest, you'll find stations that are named Kensington Station. And you'll find locations that are called Milwaukee or some form of that. So some of the locations in that story were something like Milwaukee and Kensington Station. And that makes it very familiar for people because they understand that there is a certain locality to the story. So yeah, names do have a meaning, and sometimes that meaning is a lot deeper than you may expect. So you're right there.
I'd like to end it here. If we have more questions, we have the panel discussion on the end, but we also have more authors to get to. So, Mike Janssen, give him a round of applause. Thank you very much. Thank you. And keep your questions because they're going to be approachable all day long, so that's nice. And now it's time to turn to our second author. She's the 8-time winner of the Pure Fantasy Award. She is the 2010 Unleash Award winner, and she just published a book, unfortunately in Dutch, it's called Vraag op het Spoor. But it's a doorstopper book full of 40 short stories, and it's a bestseller already. She just published it and it's garnering great reviews everywhere I see on the internet. So people are very much happy with her. She's a great writer. Give her a round of applause. Annie Haan.
Just one story for you, but it will last 12 minutes.
Awesome.
I think, perhaps 13. As needed. Slowly Cinda sinks into her rock jelly bed. It closes around her like non-stick blue syrup. Massage lower back and temples, Rocco. The bed increases the pressure at the desired spots. Neck and shoulders. She just managed to hold back the word please. It's bad enough she gave the bed a name. The sight of the tangle of spaceship that is Congo boosts her heart rate. Would Ethan be there? Just in front of her, a puller rises up, 100 ships tethered behind it. She navigates the Niobe to the sunny side of the conglomerate and stops her there, enjoying the sight of arriving and departing ships which constantly change the appearance and composition of the artificial planet. It almost feels like home. The interception capsule shoots towards her from Congo to collect her contribution. Fortunately, she still has enough bales of white flour in the hold to buy 3 24 hours. It doesn't get any better than her white flour. Ethan isn't here. She only gets funny, vulgar reactions to her call on the Centercom. There are enough men, but they're not Ethan. She doesn't feel like another one, even though she tells herself she is as free as a butterfly. Pissed off with her 3 costly 24 hours, Cinda strolls through Congo's core. A holo of a woman on a rock jelly bed attracts her attention. She seems so happy in her moving bed. Never alone again, says the standard voice. All your needs fulfilled. You're joking, she says. Worth every penny, the hunchbacked seller says. He points his thumb towards his back. I've got one myself. That may be so, but I can't afford this. The man looks around. There is another way to get it. 2 days and the remainder of the white flour pourer, but an illegal copy of the Needs program richer, Cindy skips back to the Niobe. She must leave immediately. For Ethan, she leaves a message. I want you, heading for chalk. Cinda. Tired? Rocco flows over her body, leaving only her face uncovered. She closes her eyes and lets his murmuring increased tension in the musculi temporoparietalis, subscapularis and sacrolobalaris and massage come over her. Perhaps she should switch off the latter. Yeah, I'm tired. She doesn't have to confirm it. Rocco is completely tuned into her moods and needs. Still, she does. It feels as if she has company. On chalk, she's allowed to dock, providing she immediately reports to interception. You're early. An official with a center parting in his hair glances over her papers and gives them back across his desk. 24 hours. Cinda laughs. Again 2 days extra. The load of dry digitalis will barely cover the costs. The official looks at her from head to toe. I could speed it up. He licks his lower lip and gestures with his eyebrows at the door behind him. 15 minutes and you're through. What? Cinda bends over his desk, immediately activating the protective screen. Part of her hair crackles and falls down on the other side of the screen, like wisps of dark rain. With a dirty look, the official wipes the hair away. That will be 24 hours. We'll take the fee off your load. 24 hours docked to chalk is worse than visiting her mother. In her misery, Cinda changes bits of Rocco's software. She connects the bed to the Niobe's interface. Present? Its voice echoes throughout the ship. It sounds tinny, like those old Polygon movies her mother loves to watch. She wipes away the tears. She should not think of her mother. If that woman hadn't been so stupid to join that costly cult, Cinda would now be with Ethan instead of waiting at chalk to unload heart rhythm meds. I'm here, Rocco. A cruiser docks next to the Niobe, rather carelessly. Cinda hears the hulls cracking and cringes. The sound cuts through her like a knife. With a bang, she opens her comm screen to give the cruiser pilot a piece of her mind. Cin, is that you? Ethan! She pushes her hair into shape. Feeling a tangle, she realizes she is not video presentable, and she pushes the screen down. Audio. Sorry, my love, about the scratch. I saw the Niobe and another cruiser was already going for the gap, so I wanted to dock quickly. Glad I caught you. I arrived too late at Congo. I'll pay for the damage, okay? Why is her heart racing? Yes. I'm going to register. Are you coming over in about 1 hour? An hour is long enough. Yes. Great, I'll see you. The hydrojet doesn't calm her down and the mirror is clear. Too much hair in places it shouldn't be and too little padding where it should. She's getting old. Tense? Apparently, Rocco can remotely sense her mood after her fiddling with the interface. Cinda walks to the bed and puts her hand on it. Healthy tension, Rocco, don't worry. The blue jelly rises up, pushes against her hand and touches her wrists. 102 heartbeats, 96% saturation, blood pressure, murmurs Rocco. Ethan's arms around her, his mouth on hers. Who cares what she looks like? This is Ethan, and his belt tells her he wants her as much as she wants him. Whispering, "Substitute me," she slips out of his rock jelly bed. The bed bulges up against Ethan and fills the space left by her body. It's no exact copy of her, but the pressure against his body will be the same. A wonderful update. She wants it for Rocco as well. Happy? Cinda is smiling. How cool that Rocco can sense her mood as soon as she enters the Niobe. The voice has suddenly lost its tinny quality. It sounds like Ethan. I'm happy, yes. She caresses Rocco, causing his surface to shiver. Are you okay too? Rocco bulges around her hand and pushes her fingers apart. Small blue tongues lick between them. It feels exciting, like Ethan. But Rocco isn't Ethan. She pulls her hand away. Don't, Rocco. Not good. Not good. Halfway with an ascension, on day 78, things go wrong. Her belly is aching, blood running down her legs. Injured? Miscarriage, she groans and curls in on Rocco. He bulges up against her belly and chest. With her eyes closed, it is as if she's laying against Ethan's butt. When has Rocco learned this? Which update was this? A bit like Ethan, says Rocco. Cinda freezes up. You talk in sentences? Rocco pushes against her belly. Here? Right there, yes. Now she starts to cry after all. What is she supposed to tell Mother? That she almost became a grandma? Grief? Yes, Rocco. Warmth grazes her eyes. Close them. Rocco's here. 3,000. I counted them, Ethan whispers. They are intertwined on Rocco. His surface is bouncing along. Too long. Cinda is talking, but she doesn't say anything about the baby. She wraps her arms and legs around Ethan and pushes her heel against his butt. Are you staying? He pushes himself up and looks at her, his hip forward. She shakes her head. Another 1,045 days, then her contract ends. I can't, Ethan. My mother. His lips smother her explanation. Perhaps you could come with me. She slips it in between their lips. Now he shakes his head. I'm fed up wandering, darling. She knew it. Tomorrow morning I'm starting a new job at Congal's Interception. It pays well. You can find me there. I'll wait for you. There is so much she wants to say. That she doesn't want to miss him for so long anymore. That she's almost too old to have children. That she wants him in her life. She feels so lonely. But she says nothing. They make love until they fall asleep. Where Ethan had lain, Rocco is bulging up in replacement. It feels like Ethan, but it's not. The update is working fine. Cinda stretches herself. Satisfied? Yes, Rocco. Things are as they are. Maybe, if she updates the Niobe, she can settle her contract faster. She just needs to work a bit harder. In reverse, the Niobe shoots away from Congal. Cinda enters the destination and calculates the time path. If she hurries up and stays awake the next 2 days, she can overtake the puller before it speeds up. That will save energy and time. She is awakened by 2 hands on her shoulders. Immediately, she is sitting upright in a nav chair. The hands are massaging her neck and back. Ethan? Almost, his voice sounds from the interface. Slowly she turns. It is Ethan. His eyes are staring blindly ahead. His mouth is frozen in a grimace. He's dead. He is surrounded by a solid, yet soft and warm blue jelly coat. All right now? Asked Rocco.
So I think there's time for questions, and the first question would be, Mike already told that you respond to questions when you think of a story, so you have a question in mind. What is the question this story answers? And I think we can kind of guess.
I wanted to write a story about a wish that bounced back. And I think that it's not only wish, technique around us does that sometimes already. So that is, that was the original thought, and then I had to find something what would turn that into people, because I like to write about people.
To make it more realistic.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, fascinating story. Any questions by anyone?
Of your imagination, the blue jelly, that blew me away. It's not a question, it's a comment.
You liked it?
Yeah.
That's good to hear, thank you. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Yes, please.
Yeah, no, it's, again, what fascinates me is the transformation, how you start with a wish, is really the idea,
Yeah,
and then you've got to put people into it.
yeah.
How does that work for you?
Well,
Where do you find the people?
In a lot of my stories, things happen that have happened to me, or to somebody I know, or to, so I relate things. I love my boyfriend to be in front of me and to lepeltje, what is it called? To spoon,
Yeah.
if you lay in the bed. So this is what happens there. And then Why it is a bed, I don't know. That came up when I was writing it, but I wanted it something to really to do something to her that is so devastating, but the bed completely fulfills her needs. She wants Ethan to be there, and the bed makes sure he will be there forever. And so
Yeah, that makes it intimate.
yeah,
It's very intimate.
Yeah.
So gets closer to you.
but how the process exactly works, I don't know. I just told Daniel that I ask myself questions if I have an idea. So who is she? Why is she alone in space and traveling? That's because she has a lot of debt. She has to pay. She has to work hard. So, and from there, this came.
Uh-huh.
So.
You have no personal experience for blue jelly.
Well, but that's where you were going.
No, sorry. I wish a bed like that really existed,
Yeah.
because I think it would be. But there are massage chairs already. I mean, you can
Not
program them
the
for
same.
certain parts. Not the same. Not as this.
Yet, still, I think, yeah. So one thing I found very fascinating about your story is your very effective world building. It's like in 1-2 sentences, you allude to things and then there's immediately a world in your brain that I as a listener visualize. So how do you do this? What's your secret there?
Oh, this is filmed, right? Because
Oh.
because is it? No, one of the
Should we turn it
critiques
off?
I
Is it,
no
yeah,
one of the
okay.
critiques I get is that I'm not so good in world building.
Really?
Yeah,
Oh.
so this is great to hear because
Okay.
it's such a short story, and there in this universe I've written 3 stories so far. So planets coming together, separate, or spaceship making the planet, and so that is perhaps because I've written about it before that it's so easy now to do it in a couple of sentences.
Right.
I don't know,
Yeah.
maybe
Yeah. So
because to me it's real. It's not yet here. It will be.
you see it happening in
Yes.
your mind's eye. You actually see it happening. That's it.
Yeah.
And it's interesting what you're saying. So apparently you built this world before, and then you have stories in it. So
Yeah, this is the only world I do that. Usually I imagine everything fresh for every story,
yeah.
but with this universe, I don't know, I think it has a higher plan for me and I should write a big novel someday in it. I think that is the reason why. I keep coming back to it. I
Yeah.
like it. I like the idea of people having a total freedom and being able to, it's almost like the mobile homes in the United States where people make temporary villages and then they separate them. So I just like that idea to have a life like that.
So it's a world you keep on coming back to.
Yeah.
Wow. How important is the distinction between hard sci-fi and soft sci-fi for you in this type of
Well, I'm not a very
universe?
technical educated person, so I have to avoid these kind of things, because if I don't and the real technicians read the story that I try to, they will always feel that. I write stories about people in a future setting, in a different setting. And when technique is important, I have to ask somebody to help me out on there. So sometimes, well, a lot of times in space it's very important. I mean, if you come close to a planet, there is attraction and stuff like that, so I have to be very careful with that. So for me, that is not an easy part. So I try always not to write about that.
To write around it, as it were.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I really admire people who can do it. So that's, I love reading that kind of stories, but for me, I always try to stay at the people side of it.
But the most interesting stories are always about people, aren't they?
Well, all stories are about people,
Yeah.
yes. But I think real technical stories can be very interesting as well, as
Yeah.
long as I understand what they are going about.
Do you visualize the worlds, the situations, the
Yeah, I
places?
see this when I write.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, I see it often before I write.
Yeah.
So I am a very, in the sense, a fast writer, that if I sit down to type, I know what I'm going to write. So I think about it throughout the day or whatever. Then I sit down and I write. Otherwise I have no time. I cannot sit for an empty screen and then start to think about what I have to write. I know what I'm going to write that day. Yes.
Any more questions? No more questions? Give her a round of applause then. Thank you. And now it's time for a short break, so about 50 minutes, grab a beer, grab a Coke, and writer to win the Writers of the Future contest. In 2012, he was the first Dutch science fiction writer to be allowed membership of the Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers Association of America. And he has published lots of novels. It's Andromeda Spaceways. What is it again? Escape Pod. I can't even read my own handwriting, but he's published everywhere. He's fantastic, and he has brought his own PowerPoint with him. So give him a round of applause, please, ladies and gentlemen. Floris Kleine.
So, two things. I'm very nervous, so if I stutter, my apologies. And also, this is the first time I'm holding this device, so well, I brought my own, and this is. So if it doesn't work, Daniel, sorry.
Pijlt u naar rechts of pijlt u naar voren en pijlt u naar links of naar achter?
Let's see first. Okay, first things first. You've found this piece of paper on your chair. You may have downloaded it from the group before. If you haven't read it by now, just put it aside. You're not going to read it while I'm talking, of course. It gives some background to the story, which I will repeat now very briefly. There was an anthology published in 2010. It's called Machine of Death, which is based on the premise described in the handout you're no longer holding because you put it aside. The whole anthology revolves around stories based on a world in which the Machine of Death is real. It was a huge success. They decided to publish a second anthology and put out a call for submissions. I wrote a story. And they accepted it, they bought it, they published part 2 without my story, which I already knew because they had decided to buy more stories than they needed for the book. So my story is still with them, which is almost irrelevant to this reading, except for the fact that I'm going to have to ask you to not record and definitely not make public anything about the story because I'll get in a huge fight with the editors. And I'll probably have to give back my Kindle, which I bought with the proceeds from the story, because etc., contractual obligations. This is a private reading, so which also means, by the way, that besides my wife and the editors, you are the first people in the world who get to hear this story.
Wow.
Yes, it's first in the world.
So,
Okay, so what's about this?
Mobile phones away, recording devices away.
Yes, and a very big, broad-shouldered gentleman will be at the door, frisking you on your way out. It's not true.
You have a brain slurper there? Make sure that everyone's brain is clean.
The story is called Friendly Fire, and shall I just...
Inspiration or the Dutch market? Yeah.
Let's start with sci-fi in general first, and then edge into what the Dutch sci-fi scene is actually like.
Okay, so I've always read science fiction, fantasy, and whatever since I was about 6. When I was 6, my parents decided that it was required for me to have an encyclopedia. It was asking too many questions. So they bought me an encyclopedia.
Yeah.
And I started at A, and I ended at Z.
And that was 2 years later, you finished the entire encyclopedia, and that was...
If it took 2 years, no. It was 6 months later. So that was a 20 volume monster thing. So just read the whole thing.
Yeah.
And after that, I started at the library. Just started reading everything that I could find.
Yeah.
And well, we just had a discussion about literary stuff. I still despise it, so. And most of the books that I read in the library were not interesting for me, but I always came back to science fiction, fantasy, and a bit of horror.
And why? Why is that?
It's the sense of wonder. It's the we have an encyclopedia full of knowledge. We have Wikipedia. It's all done. And then we get into science fiction, and we have stuff that you have to think about. It's not cut and dry. It's something new. It's something unique. It's weird. It's wonderful, and that appeals to me. So that it gives me. That actually gives my brain something to do.
Something to chew on, something new to work with. Anita, how's this for you?
You mean from the start? Or
Yeah, how did you end up with, how did you start with science fiction or fantasy or
Well, it
speculative?
was a logical step after the fairy tales in the library.
Tell me.
Well, when I was small, I loved to read fairy tales, but also myths and sagas. So getting to know where the fairy tales came from. And then when I grew out of the library, there were no more fairy tale books. So I asked my mom to take adult books for me, and my mother took my first fantasy book.
Do you remember which book
because,
it was?
Yeah, because she thought, well, that's more or less like a fairy tale.
Yeah.
I don't know which one it was.
You can't remember if it was like maybe Tolkien or...
No, it was absolutely not Tolkien. I read that.
No?
I read The Hobbit, I think, when I was 19,
Yeah.
so I was rather late. And then I started at the Ring, what is it?
Lord of the Rings.
Lord of the
Yeah.
Rings,
Yeah.
even later. And I struggled through the first 200 pages, and I could not imagine why anybody liked that.
So, wow.
Yeah, sorry,
Wow.
sorry.
Yeah.
Blasphemer, you.
I know. Terrible. So I'm not a big fan.
No.
Please.
Tom, yeah, that scene I think
But
is...
so it was a logical step from the fairy tales to start reading fantasy and science fiction.
Yeah.
And I've been writing myself ever since I was small. I love to write and I like to tell stories.
Yeah.
And but to actually make the click that I could write sci-fi, that was long past 40 that I realized that I could do that.
So what made that click happen?
In fact, it was a website called korteverhalen.nl, and there was this guy called, of course it is an avatar, he's called Personnel, and he loved science fiction. And we more or less challenged each other, and I said, okay, I'm going to write my first science fiction story for him. I didn't know the guy, and he was at the Fantastels prijsuitreiking 2 years ago. Then I met him for the first time. And so I wrote that story. It's called Lieve Liefde, and it's #1